She lost both hands and was left to die, until a stranger cowboy changed her fate forever. Sarah had always known the hard work that came with living on the frontier. Her life on the small farm had never been easy, but it had been hers. She was proud of the small home she had built for herself, and each day she woke up early to tend to the animals and care for the fields. Her hands were calloused from years of labor, but they were hers, and they had always served her well. Her life was simple, and while she longed for companionship and a family, she had found contentment in the rhythm of her daily tasks. But that peace would soon be shattered in the most unexpected way. It happened on a cool autumn afternoon. Sarah was out by the barn fixing a broken fence post. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows over the land, and the air had a crispness to it, signaling that winter was not far behind. As Sarah worked, she didn't notice how the ground beneath her feet had softened with the rain from the night before. The weight of her work boot pressed deeper into the mud as she moved, unaware of the danger lurking. She was reaching for the hammer, her grip firm on the tool, when it happened. The earth beneath her suddenly gave way, and with a sharp crack the post she had been working on gave way too. In a desperate attempt to steady herself, Sarah reached out, her fingers grabbing at anything to hold on to. The ground around her crumbled, and before she could react, her feet slipped from under her. The force of her fall was immense, her body colliding with the jagged rocks hidden beneath the surface of the earth. The impact sent a sharp pain coursing through her, and her vision blurred as her body crumpled to the ground. The pain in her legs was blinding. But the worst of it was the sudden, overwhelming sense of helplessness. But the sound caught in her throat, choked off by the fear that gripped her heart. Her hands, always her greatest tools, now felt useless. She couldn't move them to brace herself. She couldn't even lift her head to see what had happened. For what felt like an eternity, she lay there, gasping for breath, her mind swimming in a haze of panic and pain. Her legs were trapped beneath her, twisted in an unnatural angle. The blood from a deep gash on her head pooled beneath her, staining the ground dark red. She could feel her consciousness slipping, and the terror of being alone, truly alone, surged within her. She had never been afraid of the wilderness before. It had always been her companion, a quiet presence that kept her grounded. But now as she lay there, unable to move, she felt it all around her, the vast emptiness, the isolation that came with being so far removed from civilization. She tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't respond. Every time she tried to move, pain shot through her body, and the strength drained from her. The blood from the gash on her head kept flowing, and her body felt weaker with each passing moment. It was as if the world had suddenly become too big, too distant, and she was too small to matter. Her farm, the place that had once felt like a sanctuary, now seemed like a prison. The barn she had worked so hard to maintain was silent, its doors hanging open, untouched by the events that were unfolding. The animals, unaware of her struggle, grazed peacefully in the distance, blissfully unaware of the tragedy that was slowly consuming her. Her mind was a whirl of thoughts, none of them helpful. She thought of the family she had lost, of her mother's soft voice that used to sing her lullabies when she was a child. Her father's rough hands, always busy but never too busy to hold her close. She had lost them both, years ago in a fire that had destroyed everything she had ever known. Since then she had made her way on her own, learning how to survive, learning how to be strong even when there was no one to help. But now, with her body broken and her future uncertain, she couldn't help but wonder if she had been wrong all along. If all her independence had only brought her to this moment, a moment of helplessness so complete, she couldn't even fight it. The hours dragged on, and with each one Sarah's body grew weaker. The sun continued its descent, casting long, twisted shadows over the land. The temperature dropped, and Sarah could feel the chill seep into her bones. Her skin turned pale, her lips cracked and dry. She was no longer sure if she was still awake or if the world around her had become a strange dream. Her eyes fluttered, but she couldn't find the strength to keep them open. Breath. The world grew darker, and the noise of her breathing seemed to echo in the emptiness. She closed her eyes, wondering if this was the end. There was no one to find her, no one to hear her cries. The thought of dying alone, forgotten, made the darkness even more terrifying. Breath. She could feel the weight of her breath growing heavier, each inhale a struggle. The night was coming, and with it the cold. And yet, even in her final moments, there was something in Sarah that refused to fully give up. A small flicker of hope, buried deep inside her, held on. Perhaps somehow someone would come. Perhaps somewhere in the vast expanse of the land, someone would see her, hear her, save her. But as the night settled in, and the stars above began to blink into existence, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if that hope was nothing more than a fleeting wish. She let herself rest, her body still, her thoughts slowing as she drifted in and out of consciousness. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt utterly alone, the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. The days that followed Sarah's fall felt like an endless blur. She had no idea how much time had passed since she had collapsed under the weight of her pain. The sun had long set, and the cold had crept in, wrapping around her body like an icy blanket. But she was still lying there in the mud, unable to move, unable to cry out for help. Her strength had abandoned her, and every breath she took seemed harder than the last. She felt so small, so fragile, as if the world itself was closing in on her. Her body had started to stiffen in the cold, and the pain that had once been a sharp reminder of her injuries had dulled into a steady throb. The blood from her head wound had dried, but she could still feel the dampness on her skin, the sticky warmth that had now turned cold. She was shivering, not just from the chill, but from fear, from the awful feeling of being completely alone. Her thoughts drifted in and out of clarity, and her mind became a series of fragmented images and memories. She remembered her childhood, the way her mother used to tuck her in at night with a soft kiss on the forehead, whispering words of comfort. She remembered her father, his strong arms lifting her up when she was little, always there to catch her when she fell. She had lost them both so many years ago, but the memories still lingered in the quiet corners of her mind. The world around her was silent, save for the distant rustling of wind through the trees and the occasional call of a bird. The farm, once a place of warmth and life, now felt distant, foreign, as though it belonged to someone else. The animals, her loyal companions for so many years, were far away, grazing in the fields, oblivious to her struggle. She had always known how to survive. Her father had taught her how to tend to the land, how to fix fences, how to care for the animals. Her mother had shown her how to cook, how to sew, and how to take care of the home. Sarah had learned everything she needed to know to make it on her own. She had faced hardship before, but she had always managed to pull through. This time, though, was different. She was broken, not just physically, but emotionally. She had never felt this kind of weakness before. She had never felt so utterly helpless. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the accident, to the moment when everything changed. She had been working on the fence, focused on the task at hand, when the ground beneath her feet had given way. The fall had happened so quickly, and the pain had come so suddenly that it was almost impossible to believe it was real. One moment she had been standing, the next she was on the ground, unable to move, unable to do anything but wait for the inevitable. The waiting was the hardest part. Each minute felt like an hour, and each hour felt like a day. She had no idea how much time had passed since the fall, but she knew that with each passing moment, her chances of survival grew slimmer. She had no food, no water, no way to protect herself from the cold that had begun to settle in. Breaths. She had no one to turn to, no one to help her. The harsh reality of her situation began to sink in, and she realized just how truly alone she was. Her body was growing weaker with each passing hour. She could feel the dizziness creeping in again, a fog settling over her mind. She tried to push it away, but it was getting harder to keep her focus. She had to stay awake. She had to stay alert. But the darkness was slowly consuming her, pulling her into a deep, heavy sleep that she couldn't escape. She tried to move her arms, to pull herself up, but it was no use. The pain in her legs was unbearable, and every time she tried to shift, it felt like her body would break into 1,000 pieces. She wanted to scream, to cry for help, but the words stuck in her throat, trapped by the fear and pain. Death. No one was coming. She was just another casualty of the unforgiving land, another lost soul who had fallen victim to the dangers of the frontier. As the hours dragged on, Sarah's mind wandered back to her life before the accident. She thought of the small joys that had once filled her days, the feeling of the warm sun on her skin, the scent of fresh bread baking in the oven, the laughter of children playing in the fields about. She missed those simple things, those moments of peace that had seemed so ordinary at the time. Now they felt like distant memories, things that belonged to someone else, to a life that was gone forever. She thought about her neighbors, the people she had once considered friends. They had all moved on with their lives, starting families, building businesses, leaving her behind in her solitude. Baba! She had never minded the loneliness, or so she thought. It had become part of her routine, the quiet existence she had made for herself. But now, in the darkness, the silence felt suffocating. She longed for the sound of another voice, the warmth of another person, but there was no one. Her body was failing her, and her mind was beginning to fade. She tried to hold on to her thoughts, but they slipped away like sand through her fingers. She could feel herself drifting, her consciousness slipping into the void. It was as though she was floating, her body disconnected from her mind. Her vision blurred, and the world around her became a hazy fog. Just as she thought she could no longer hold on, she heard something, a sound in the distance, faint but unmistakable. At first, she wasn't sure if she was imagining it. She strained to listen, her heart beating faster as the sound grew louder. Hoofbeats! Someone was coming. She tried to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper. She wasn't sure if the person could hear her. She wasn't sure if they were real. The sound of hooves grew louder, and she held on to that small glimmer of hope. Someone was coming. She had to hold on. She couldn't give up now. Not when there was a chance that someone might find her, that someone might save her. Her breath came in shallow gasps, but she focused on the sound, willing herself to stay awake. Her fingers twitched, and for a moment she thought she might be able to move them. Bah. She tried again, but it was no use. The pain was too much. The sound of hooves grew closer, and her heart skipped a beat. She wanted to call out, but her voice failed her. She wanted to sit up, to wave her arms, to do something, anything to make herself noticed, but she couldn't. She could only wait, her body too weak to respond. The sound of hooves grew louder, and for a moment Sarah thought she might be imagining it. Her mind was a haze, slipping in and out of awareness, but the steady thudding of hooves, rhythmic and sure, seemed too real to ignore. She strained to hear, trying to focus her fading senses on the sound that had somehow brought a flicker of hope back to her heart. It was hard to believe that anyone would find her out here, in the middle of nowhere on the edge of death. But as the hooves grew closer, the weight of that disbelief seemed to lift, even if just for a second. A glimmer of hope, no matter how small, was all she had left. She took a shallow breath, her chest heaving with the effort. She could feel the air moving through her lungs, a reminder that she was still alive, and that maybe, just maybe, someone would come for her. The sound grew louder, the hooves beating against the earth like a promise. Someone was coming. Brace. Someone was on their way, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah didn't feel so alone. She closed her eyes, her head heavy and aching. She wanted to call out, but her voice felt like it was trapped somewhere deep inside her, unable to escape. She wanted to sit up, to wave her arms, to do anything to make herself seen, but her body refused to respond. She could feel the weight of the cold pressing down on her, the chill seeping deeper into her bones with each passing moment. The pain in her legs had become almost unbearable, and she couldn't move them at all. She was trapped, helpless, but the sound of the approaching rider was the only thing that kept her going. And then, just as she was beginning to lose hope again, she heard something else. A voice, faint but unmistakable. It wasn't the voice of a man shouting her name or calling for help. It was quiet, almost a whisper, but it was enough. "Easy there," the voice said, calm and steady, like a voice that had seen too much and carried the weight of the world. "Don't try to move." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a dream. Someone had found her. She could feel a rush of emotions flooding through her. Relief, fear, hope, confusion. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to ask him who he was, but her throat felt dry and tight, and her lips refused to form the words. "Birth." The voice came again, closer this time. "I've got you!" "You're gonna be all right." With great effort, Sarah turned her head toward the voice. Through the haze of her blurry vision, she saw the outline of a figure, a man on horseback, his silhouette framed against the twilight sky. He was tall, his posture confident, and the way he sat on the horse told her that he was no stranger to the land, no stranger to the dangers of the frontier. His face was weathered, worn by time and the harsh elements, but there was something kind in his eyes, something that told her he wasn't just another wanderer. His movements were purposeful, but there was a tenderness in the way he approached her, as if he knew exactly what she needed. Even without asking, she couldn't make out his words, but she could hear the softness in his voice, a stark contrast to the hard world she had come from. It was as if he was speaking directly to her heart, soothing the panic that had been steadily building inside her. She had never expected someone like him to find her out here, in this place where the land swallowed everything whole, where the wind carried only dust and silence. He dismounted, the sound of his boots hitting the ground reverberating in her ears. She could barely keep her eyes open, her head heavy on the cold earth, but she forced them to focus, forced them to see the man who had come for her. He was a cowboy, a stranger in a land she had grown used to. His clothes were simple but sturdy, the kind of clothes someone wore when they didn't have time to waste on anything unnecessary. His hat was tipped low, casting a shadow over his face, but Sarah could see enough to know that he was strong in a way that made her feel safe, even though she had no idea who he was. He kneeled beside her, his movements slow and careful, as if he didn't want to startle her. "You're hurt," he said softly, his fingers brushing against her forehead, checking her pulse. Bait, she could feel his hands, warm and steady, and it gave her something to hold on to in the midst of the chaos in her mind. Sarah tried to speak, to tell him how much it hurt, to beg him to save her, but all that came out was a weak gasp. Her body was shutting down, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop it. She was slipping away. The cowboy didn't seem bothered by her silence. He simply continued to check her wounds, his hands gentle but firm as he worked to assess the damage. She could feel the roughness of his touch, the calluses on his fingers, the kind of hands that had known hard work, just like hers. But unlike hers, his hands were still capable of doing what needed to be done. "You're lucky I found you," he muttered under his breath. Brett. This land isn't kind to the weak. His words weren't harsh, but they carried weight. She could hear the truth in them, the truth that she had known all along but hadn't wanted to accept.
Out here, the land didn't care about who you were or where you came from. It only cared about whether you could survive.
And right now, she didn't know if she could. He didn't waste any time. Breaths, his voice, steady and calm, filled the space between them.
I'm going to get you out of here.
You're not dying today. His words were firm, confident, and for the first time since her accident, Sarah felt a flicker of something inside her, a spark of hope, of something that felt like life. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her holding on. He gently lifted her, supporting her weight as he cradled her against his chest. She wanted to protest, to tell him that she couldn't move, that she was too broken, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she let herself be carried, feeling the warmth of his body against hers, the strength that radiated from him like a shield. The cowboy didn't speak much after that, but Sarah didn't need words. She could feel his presence, his calm energy, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had no idea where he was taking her. But in that moment, it didn't matter. She trusted him, a complete stranger, with her life. As he carried her, she felt the weight of her injuries, but she also felt the first stirrings of hope. He had found her. He had come for her when no one else would, and that was enough for now. As the cowboy carried Sarah through the wilderness, each step felt like a small victory. The land around them was vast, stretching out in every direction like a sea of brown and green, endless and unforgiving. The cowboy's pace was steady, determined, and despite the weight of her body against his, he moved with ease. Sarah had no idea where he was taking her, but it didn't matter. His presence was enough. His calmness, his quiet confidence, seemed to wrap around her like a protective shield. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to relax. She had been so tense for so long, holding on to the fear, the pain, the uncertainty, but now with him, she could finally let go. Her head rested against his chest, and she could hear the steady thrum of his heartbeat. It was a sound that reassured her, a rhythm that grounded her in the moment. She felt safe. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. The world outside seemed to fade away, and all that mattered was the warmth of his arms around her, the strength of his body that held her close. She had always been independent, had always relied on herself, but now, in this moment, she felt something different, something fragile, something human. The ride continued for what felt like hours, and though Sarah was too weak to speak, she kept her eyes open, watching the world pass by. The cowboy didn't rush. He moved at a pace that felt natural, unhurried, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. There was no panic in his movements, no sign of distress. He was simply focused on getting her to safety. His quiet determination was something she could feel, like a steady flame that never flickered, no matter how strong the wind. Eventually they reached a small cabin, tucked away in a secluded area. The cabin was simple, rustic, and yet it felt like a sanctuary in the middle of the wilderness. The cowboy gently lowered Sarah to the ground, and she winced slightly at the movement, her body protesting the change. But despite the pain, she didn't pull away. She didn't want to. She had no strength left to fight. Instead, she let herself be guided into the cabin, where the warmth of a fire greeted her like an old friend. The cowboy helped her settle onto a worn couch by the hearth, his hands gentle as he moved her. "Just relax," he said softly. "You're safe here."
Sarah nodded weakly, her body trembling from the effort of the journey and the cold that had settled in her bones.
The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting a warm glow over the room. It was a small, humble place with simple furnishings, a rough-hewn table, a couple of chairs, and a bed tucked in the corner. The air smelled of wood and earth, familiar and comforting in a way that made Sarah feel strangely at peace. It was a far cry from the barren land she had been lying on just hours before, a place that had once seemed so cold and indifferent. Now, here, in this small cabin, there was warmth. There was life. The cowboy moved around the room, gathering blankets and water, tending to the fire. He didn't speak much, but his actions spoke louder than words ever could. Sarah watched him, her gaze following his every move, trying to take in everything she could about this man who had saved her, who had found her when she had given up on herself.
He was a stranger, and yet, in this moment, he felt more like family than anyone she had ever known.
Breath. As he returned to her side, he placed a warm cup of tea in her hands. "Here," he said, his voice as steady as ever. "Drink this. It'll help." Sarah took the cup, her fingers trembling slightly as she held it. She didn't have the energy to speak, but the gratitude she felt toward him was overwhelming. She took a sip of the tea, the warmth of it spreading through her chest, soothing the chill that had settled there. For a moment, she simply closed her eyes and let herself feel the comfort of the warmth, the fire, the safety of the cabin. Ursix. It was a luxury she hadn't known she needed until now. The cowboy sat down beside her, his gaze never leaving her face. Narration. "How do you feel?" he asked, his tone gentle but direct. Sarah opened her eyes, meeting his gaze for the first time. His eyes were dark, serious, but there was something kind in them. Something that made her feel seen, truly seen, in a way that no one ever had. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance to him. Breaths. She wasn't just someone to pity. She was a person. And he was here to help her, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "I don't know," Sarah said quietly, her voice hoarse. "I feel weak. And I'm scared."
The cowboy nodded, his expression softening. "That's all right."
"It's natural to feel that way.
But you're here now, and you're gonna get better."
"We'll take it one step at a time." His words were simple, but they were exactly what she needed to hear. For the first time since the accident, Sarah felt the weight of her fear lift, even if just a little.
It wasn't gone, not entirely, but it wasn't as heavy as it had been.
She wasn't alone anymore. The cowboy stood up and moved toward the small kitchen area, returning with a bowl of soup. He set it down beside her, urging her to eat.
"It's not much, but it'll help," he said, and there was a quiet pride in his voice.
But what he had, he was willing to share. And that, in itself, was enough. Sarah took the spoon and brought it to her lips, the warm broth comforting as it slid down her throat. She ate slowly, savoring the taste, grateful for the small act of kindness. She had never been one to rely on others, but now she found herself accepting the care without hesitation, without pride. She needed it, and he was offering it freely. As she finished the soup, the cowboy moved to the fireplace, adjusting the log so the fire burned brighter. Sarah watched him, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened, from the fall, from the pain, from the fear that had consumed her. But now, in this quiet cabin, there was peace. There was safety. And, for the first time in a long time, there was hope. The cowboy turned back to her, his face softer now, his eyes more relaxed. "You're safe here," he repeated, and this time there was a sense of finality in his words.
There was no more urgency, no more fear. The danger was behind her, for now.
Sarah nodded, letting the comfort of his words sink in. She was safe. She was alive. And, for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to rest, to let go of the tension that had been building inside her for so long. The cowboy didn't stay long after that. He offered her one last glance, a silent promise that he would be there, and then he left the cabin to take care of whatever needed to be done outside. Sarah closed her eyes, the weight of the day finally taking its toll. As sleep claimed her, she realized that, though she didn't know what the future held, she was no longer alone, Breas, and that, in itself, was enough to keep her going. The days that followed were quiet, but they were filled with a new kind of hope, breaths. Sarah woke each morning to the sound of birds outside the cabin and the warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth. The cowboy, whose name she had learned was Jack, continued to care for her, never asking for anything in return. His presence was a constant reassurance, a steady anchor in a world that had once felt too unpredictable. Sarah's body was healing, though slowly. The pain in her legs, the weakness that had overtaken her, began to fade with each passing day. At first, the simplest tasks, sitting up, standing, walking, felt impossible. But with Jack's help, she slowly regained some of her strength. He would assist her when she needed it. But he never did everything for her, round in despair. Instead, he encouraged her to do what she could on her own, giving her space to find her independence again. One morning after a week of rest, Sarah tried standing on her own for the first time. Her legs wobbled beneath her, and the dizziness returned, making her knees buckle. But before she could fall, Jack was there, his strong hands catching her with ease. He didn't scold her for trying too soon, nor did he treat her like she was fragile. Instead, he smiled softly and helped her steady herself. "Take it slow," he said, his voice calm and patient. "You're doing good." Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself.
"I think I can try again," she said, her voice quiet but determined. It had been so long since she had felt any real strength in her body, and the idea of standing on her own, without help, felt like a small victory.
Jack nodded approvingly and stepped back, giving her space. She focused on her legs, on finding her balance, and slowly, carefully, she stood once more. The pain was still there, but it was more manageable now. She felt a new sense of pride fill her, something she hadn't felt in what felt like forever. "I did it," she whispered to herself, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Jack gave a quiet chuckle from where he stood by the door watching her.
"You sure did."
Over the next few weeks, Sarah grew stronger. Each day brought small improvements. She could walk without Jack's support. She could hold a cup of water without it shaking in her hands.
She even started helping around the cabin, chopping wood and preparing simple meals. At first, it felt strange, like she was rediscovering a part of herself that had been lost. But slowly, it became part of her routine again. But she was no longer the broken woman who had been left to die in the wilderness. She was regaining control over her life, bit by bit. The nights were the hardest. That was when the fear and the uncertainty would creep back in, when the memories of the accident would play over and over in her mind. For sometimes she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding with the weight of everything she had been through. But Jack was always there, just a room away. He never pushed her to talk, never made her feel like she had to explain what she was going through. He simply respected her space, offering his quiet presence when she needed it most. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a soft pink, Sarah and Jack sat by the fire. She was staring into the flames, lost in thought, when Jack spoke, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. "You've come a long way," he said quietly, glancing over at her.
"When I found you, I didn't think you'd make it."
But here you are, stronger every day. Breath. Sarah met his gaze, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. She hadn't realized how much she had changed, how much progress she had made, until he pointed it out. It had been so gradual, so quiet, that it was easy to forget how far she had come. But Jack had seen it all, and his words filled her with a warmth she hadn't expected. Breath. I didn't think I'd make it either, she said softly, but somehow I'm still here.
Jack nodded, his expression softening.
You're tough. I've seen a lot of people give up when life gets hard.
But you didn't. You fought.
Press. And now you're here. Sarah swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. She had always been independent, had always believed that she could handle anything life threw her way. But this was different. She had faced death, had been so close to giving up, and yet here she was, alive, stronger than ever. The realization was humbling, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life she had been given, for the chance to start over, to rebuild. I'm glad you found me, Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. Jack smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. You would have found your way. I'm just glad I was there when you needed help. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound, the crackling of the fire. Sarah could feel the warmth of it on her face, and for the first time in so long she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She was no longer afraid of what the future held. Desk. She was no longer defined by the accident, by the pain, by the loss. She had a chance now, a chance to live, to build something new. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah and Jack settled into a quiet routine. He continued to teach her how to live off the land, how to hunt, fish, and gather what they needed, pray. Sarah, in turn, showed him how to make things last, how to repair broken tools, how to cook simple meals with the ingredients they had on hand. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was their life, and they made it work. One evening, as the stars filled the sky above them, Sarah sat outside, her eyes tracing the constellations. She thought about how far she had come, about everything she had lost and everything she had gained. She thought about Jack, the cowboy who had saved her, who had never once asked for anything in return. She realized, with a quiet sense of wonder, that she had never known someone like him. He was kind, strong, and patient, but he didn't pity her. He saw her for who she was, for what she was capable of, and that made all the difference. Breath. Jack joined her outside, sitting down beside her without a word. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable, easy, and in that silence, Sarah knew that she wasn't alone anymore. I don't know what the future holds, Sarah said finally, her voice soft and thoughtful. But I know that I want to face it, with you. Jack looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then his lips curved into a small smile. But whatever it is, I'm glad we'll face it together.
And in that moment, under the stars, with the warmth of the fire still glowing in the background, Sarah realized that she had found something more valuable than survival.
She had found a future, one she would build with the cowboy who had changed her life forever.